Hello, welcome back to Jesus What a Savior. I'm glad you're here with me today. Let's review our last lesson. Why did God send a flood to cover the whole world? Do you remember that people multiplied and they were continually doing bad things? Continually means they were doing it constantly. They were always doing evil and bad things. And we know that bad things are called what? Sins. God was angry with this great sin of all the people. And God doesn't just get angry like we do. He never loses his temper like we do. When he gets angry, he is right. And when he acts in his anger, he is right. That's not always true with you and I. The decision he made as a result of all the people who sinned was to cover his creation with water in a flood. Did everyone die in the flood? Almost. Of all the people on the earth, almost all of them died. Can you tell me who God spared? That means he saved them or rescued them from death. Who did God spare? Who did God save from dying in the flood? It was Noah and his family. Why did God save Noah and his family? They were sinners. They certainly were, and all 8 of the people that God saved from dying in the flood, they were all sinners. But God did something to Noah's heart, and God did something to Noah's wife's heart, and God did something to his 3 sons' hearts, and to his 3 sons' wives' hearts. He did something. All 8 of those people trusted God, and they believed him. God asked them to do something, and they did it. They obeyed. They loved him. They knew they couldn't fix their own broken hearts, and they knew that they deserved God's punishment. But they also knew that God could help them. Can God help you? He sure can. He can help me. These 8 people that God rescued, they had faith in God, and they did things God's way. God was pleased with Noah and his family, and he covered their sins and saved them from death in the flood. So God saved 8 people. Why such a small number? Is it too hard for God to save a lot of people? Is it because God can only take care and love a few people at a time? These are important questions. Where do you think we could find answers for these questions? You're getting familiar with this book, right? This is the Bible. This is the most special book in the whole world, and it talks about the most special person of all. That's God. And it tells us a lot of other things. But we'll find the answers in this book. So after the flood, the world began to fill up again with people. Noah and his children, they were sinners, right? So all the people born after the flood are sinners also. I'm going to talk to you about another man and a woman. They were sinners. They were a husband and wife. I have some pictures here. Named Abram and Sarai, husband and wife. I'll put those over here. God commanded Abram to leave his home and travel to a land far away. Do you know this story? That's Abram. And he's looking at a land far away. God called him to go and live somewhere else. Abram obeyed. God made a wonderful promise to him. He said that he would be a nation of a great number of people. Now, even though it was hard for him to leave his home, you can imagine that, can't you? That it would be hard to leave your home that you love. He trusted God and he obeyed him. And he went where God wanted him to go. He loved God. So God gave him and his wife a new name. Do you know their names? Are you familiar with this story? Abram became Abraham, and Sarai became Sarah. Now, Abraham and Sarah had no children. God promised them that they would have children, specifically that Sarah would have a son. There seemed to be a problem, though, because Abraham and Sarah were very old. And very old women cannot have children or babies. But God promised that she would have a baby. Do you think God was confused? Did God make a promise that he could not keep? Of course not. To say those things is silly. God does not get confused, and God always keeps his promises. And nothing is too hard for God. God kept his promise, and a son was born. Can you see in this picture? Abraham with his gray beard, he's getting old. And Sarah with her gray hair, she's an old woman. And look at the new little baby. Nothing is too hard for God. He promised this little baby, and he delivered on his promise. It was actually a miracle because she was too old to have a baby, but she had one. Now, Isaac was this baby's name. And they were very excited to have Isaac as their son. The great promise keeper, you know who that is, right? The great promise keeper kept his promise and did exactly as he said he would. And Isaac grew up to be a young man. And Abraham and Sarah never forgot that Isaac was a miracle from the Lord. Now one day God spoke to Abraham and commanded him to do something very hard. Some of you know this story. Do you know what God commanded Abraham to do to Isaac? God commanded him, he told him, you shall sacrifice your son. That means you'll kill him. And you'll offer him to me as a sacrifice. Now we usually, or I should say, God had his people sacrifice an animal, but he was asking something special of Abraham. He was asking him to sacrifice his own son. Does God ask or command us to do bad things ever? God does not, and he cannot command us to do bad things. God is all good, and he's all wise. He is also all powerful, and he can do anything he wants, right? Abraham knew these things. He knew God was all powerful, and he trusted and obeyed God. And as hard as it was, he did take his son to do exactly what God told him to do. But Abraham knew that God promised that he would have grandchildren through his son Isaac. So he knew if he were to kill his son, there's only one answer. God will raise him from the dead. Can God do such things? Yes, he can. He can do anything he wants. And it would be no problem for God to raise Isaac from the dead and then to give him children and Abraham grandchildren. So Abraham trusted God with all his heart, and he obeyed him. Now I'm going to read to you this story, this true story, and it's found in the book of Genesis. We've been in this book for all of these lessons. There's so many wonderful things in the book of Genesis. And I'm going to read from chapter 22. So some of you older kids, you might want to get your Bible and read along. I'll give you just a moment. Genesis chapter 22. And I'm going to read from verses 10 through 13. This is the story of Abraham doing what God told him to do. Okay, I'll start reading now. Genesis 22, verse 10. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. He said, that's the angel. He said, Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, that's like a lamb, caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son Isaac. I have another picture here. Isn't that exciting? Abraham was obeying God completely, and an angel called up from heaven to say, Stop. And you think he stopped? Of course he stopped. And then he looked up because he was so excited. He wanted to make an offering to the Lord, and the Lord provided just that. I'll put this up on the board. Abraham took the ram and he offered it to God as a sacrifice instead of Isaac. He was very glad that it worked out this way. And God was very happy that he chose Abraham as his friend. Abraham was a sinner, just like Adam and Eve. And Abel, do you remember Abel, who offered a good sacrifice? And just like Noah, remember Noah? He was a sinner, but he obeyed God. Abraham was just like that. Like Abel and Noah, though, Abraham knew that he could not fix his heart. These are dark hearts. You know what these mean. These are sinful hearts. I'm going to put these over here. Abraham knew he could not fix his heart, but God did a work in his heart, and he covered his sin. Abraham had a heart that loved God and obeyed him, that did whatever he wanted him to do. So God covered his dark heart. Do you remember from our other lessons, the red heart? Let's put this over Abraham's heart. Abraham trusted God, and he did things God's way. And so God covered his heart and took care of his sin. God was very happy with Abraham's trust and obedience. The Bible calls that faith. Abraham had faith in God. So God made a great promise to Abraham and all his children. And I have a pretty special picture here. That's Abraham. What's he looking up at? A starry sky. I really like that picture. I'm going to read to you again from Genesis 22, and I'm going to read verses 17 and 18. This is a promise God made to Abraham. And when God makes a promise, he keeps it. I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you, Abraham, have obeyed my voice. Have you ever looked up at a sky full of stars? Do you think that you could count all of them? You can't. Have you ever gone to the beach and played in the sand? You probably have. Do you think you could count every little grain of sand on the beach? That's how many grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren and on and on and on that God promised to give to Abraham. Abraham will have more descendants than can even be counted. And these descendants, these children of Abraham, will trust and obey, and they will love God with their heart. People who know that only God can fix their sinful, broken hearts and make them happy. God will say to these people, "You are my people and my friends." God is so great and so powerful that he is able to save more than 8 people. God chooses to save lots and lots of people. More people than we can even count, like the stars in the sky and the sand on the beach. God made that promise to Abraham a long, long time ago. And God is still keeping that promise today. Isn't he the most special person of all? We've come to the end of our time today. I am so glad that you are here. There's even more of this great story of God loving and saving people. I would love for you to come back again. I love you, but you know who loves you even more, don't you? I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.